Let's get ready to rumble. In this video, RPG Deathmatch, we have basic fantasy role-playing that's going to be facing off against White Box. And we're going to look at which one is the better game. Which one should you put your hard-earned pennies behind? Both are OSR retro clones of old school D&D. Both have a free digital version that you can download if you don't want to pay anything for it. If you want the physical copy, both are about $5 to order a physical copy, so they're either free or cheap to get into. Basic Fantasy weighs in at 164 pages, whereas White Box weighs in at 142 pages. So what is it in between these pages that makes one better than the other? In my opinion, nothing. See, I love both of these games, but there are some slight differences between the two, and today we are going to look at those differences and similarities, and you can then decide which version is better for you and your group. So, joking and clickbait aside, I've had several viewers ask me my opinion on which game is better or why they should get into one over the other, and instead of going all into it in the comments, this is a video that I've been wanting to make for quite some time, and I've just gotten around to doing it. It's in that backlog of videos that I have to do after the holidays. But I think both games are fantastic. I think both games have great merits and stand on their own. But we're going to look at some of the differences between the two games, and I hope that this answers some of those questions that people have about it. So, without any further ado, let's get stuck in and take a look at Basic Fantasy versus White Box. So, the first thing that we're going to look at is the size. Basic Fantasy comes in paperback and hardback. I have both, along with every other book that they have published and put out. And I'll continue to buy everything they put out for Basic Fantasy. Whereas White Box is more the digest size book. A little easier to travel with, but that's really not that big a deal and subjective. So I guess you have to ask yourself, does size really matter? The second thing that we can look at as a difference between these two is the art. Speaking of things that are subjective, because some people don't care about art at all. They're fine with just having text. I myself am an art person, so the better the art is, or the more attractive the art is, the more I get drawn into a book. Both books have a full color cover with a red dragon on the Basic Fantasy book and a red dragon on the White Box book. Both are filled with line art, black and white line art inside. Some of your character line art in Basic Fantasy. Basic Fantasy does not have as much art. It is packed with more text, in my opinion. And I haven't gone through and counted them individually, but I mean, there's a lot of good old school looking art in the Basic Fantasy book, done by multiple artists, and I believe donated by a lot of different artists. Whereas your cover art is done by one person for White Box, and the interior done by Wbfmag. So you open it up, fantastic picture right there. Let's see, we're going to look at the character options. There's the cleric and some adventurers getting ready to go into a building. So the art style stays the same throughout white box. And I'll be honest, in my opinion, I do like white box art better, but I like both of them. So I'm not saying it is better or whatever. Again, art is subjective. You may not care about the art at all. But one of the things that is to note is there is the paperback and hardback version. Both have the same cover. There are 3 that I know of covers for white box. You have the traditional red dragon. They're all digest size. You have the black and white, more retro wraparound cover. And then this cover, which does not wrap around. The content is the same in the white box books. It's just various covers. And I like it enough that I'm going to get whichever cover they put out. So that's really not a factor for most people, but if they put out 10 more covers, I would probably buy all 10 of them just because I really like the art style that they use, and I'm a big fan of the game. And if you've watched my videos, you know that I did get my start in the OSR with Basic Fantasy, but white box is my game of choice. Now, my friend Brent likes to mess with me about I need to just burn all my Basic Fantasy books because of how much white box stuff I do. But that's not true, because they're all still useful even if I'm not running Basic Fantasy. And we'll get into that as the video goes along. So I'm really just sticking to the 2 core books. There are lots of supplements for Basic Fantasy, most of which I think you can get in print off of Amazon. And there are a lot of supplements for white box. I've done a video on that. Most of those you get off of Drive-Thru-RPG. Price point's about the same. It's like $3 to $4 for a supplement, which, depending on the supplement, add a lot of different things. It could be new classes, monsters, magic items, settings, whatever. So we're not going to focus on any of that. We're just going to focus on the 2 core games, which is your basic D&D, and the classes within, which is your cleric, fighter, magic user, and thief, which both of these games come with. However, they are slightly different. So in Basic Fantasy, all of the classes go up to level 20. And let me find one of the charts here. So if you look at the magic user chart, it goes from 1 to 20 with spell progression and everything else. And in white box, they go to level 10. Again, magic user and spell progression, but they only go to level 10. Now, you can go beyond 10. So before somebody asks that, it tells you in the book how to go beyond 10. But as far as it is written, this only goes to 10. Now, that may or may not be a big deal to some people. I like lower level games, and it is very rare that I run a game that goes above 10th level anyway. So I'm not likely to run a 15th level, 17th level, or 20th level game. However, it is nice to already have that option prepped for you if you want to run something like that, and Basic Fantasy has that. Now, this gives all of the classes to level 10. However, unlike Basic Fantasy, it limits the demi-human races. For instance, dwarves in this can be fighters or thieves, and they can only advance to 6th level. Halflings can be a fighter up to 4th level or a thief up to 6th level, and elves can be up to a 4th level fighter or an 8th level magic user. Whereas there is no demi-human limit on the level cap in Basic Fantasy. Now, do you have to use that? No, because I don't. I threw that rule out first thing. But if you wanted to use it, that is more old school and the way it is in white box. Basic Fantasy also allows clerics to be, or dwarves to be clerics right out the gate, and white box does not. Let's see. In Basic Fantasy, elves can be any of the 4 classes, but they are the only race that can multi-class as a fighter, magic user, or magic user thief. Multi-classing isn't really gone over a lot in White Box, and only briefly touched on a little bit in there, or they call it combination classes. But same thing, you get the idea. So there are some slight variations between the level cap for the races on White Box, but not on Basic Fantasy. They both have restrictions on, if you're an elf, you can be this. If you're a dwarf, you can be this. Humans can be any of the 4 classes. And again, like all old school games, you are the referee, and you can decide whether you want to use that rule or just let people play a dwarf cleric up to level 20. It's entirely up to you. I'm just presenting it as it is in the book. Both games present similar class and or racial abilities, but they differ on a couple of points. For instance, thief skills in Basic Fantasy. Let's look at that real quick. Flip over to the thief. Has the thieving skill, the matrix right here, which is percentile and gets better as they level up. And White Box doesn't use that. White Box uses an ability on the thief, which is called thievery. And the way thievery works, if I can get to the thief, it's on their level progression chart. Starts out at a 2, goes up to a 5. And as they progress in levels, whenever a player playing a thief wants to do something that is thievery, the GM rolls a d6, and if they roll the players or the character's thievery or less, then it worked. If they roll higher, then it didn't. But it also says in here that the DM rolls it, or the referee rolls it in secret behind the screen, because thieves always think they're successful. So you let them think that until something bad happens. It's an interesting way to do that, and it also is a mechanic that has been used in some of the other expansion books. Like a ranger has, I think, like tracking or something, and it works the same way as thievery. Some of the characters have things like lore, and it works just like thievery. It's a special ability for them without having a big matrix to deal with, and it does make the game simpler. However, those looking for a more traditional old school feel might want to use the Thieves ability matrix that's in here. My group likes the thievery skill better for 2 reasons. Number 1, it's simple and fast, and the system can be used to represent the special abilities of other classes, like I said, like a ranger tracking something. It's just easy to do with that, especially if you're making up your own classes. Another place that the 2 games differ is on saving throws. So in Basic Fantasy, you have your traditional saving throw matrix, you know, breath weapon, magic, wand, death ray, so on and so forth. It is presented 2 ways in White Box. You have the saving throw matrix, which is not the primary way, that's the optional way to do it. Because the primary way to do it, again, we'll look at the thief, all of their progression charts have this on. They have a saving throw. It's a single save number, and like the thief starts at a 14, then a 13, then a 12, 11, and it's a d20 roll to try to get over that. It gives you the benefit of, you know, when you can't think of, you want them to make a save against something, but it doesn't really relate to one of the things on the matrix chart, you can just have them make a saving throw. Whereas sometimes it can be a little wonky when you have them do a save versus something that just doesn't seem right, but it's the closest thing you can come to on that matrix. The single save allows you to give a save for pretty much whatever you want to. I prefer it, my kids prefer it, my gaming group on Tuesdays prefers it, so we like the single save. However, it does present both ways in this book, so if you want to do it the other way, you can. Let's see. Speaking of options, White Box offers both ascending and descending armor class, whereas Basic Fantasy only offers ascending armor class. For hit points, weapon damage, and such, White Box uses strictly a d6 plus any modifiers. So if a monster has 5 hit die, you roll 5d6 to figure out how many hit points they have for a battle. All of the characters just have a number of hit dice as they progress, and each of them is a d6. Except on some rare occasions where it'll just be like a 1. You know, like it'll be on the first level they might get 1d6. Second level they might just get plus 1 hit point. That depends greatly on the class. That does differ in Basic Fantasy, which incorporates the use of the D4, the D8, the D10, and the D12 amongst, you know, hit points and weapon damage and such, and that does add a bit more variety. So it's 6 one, half a dozen the other, whichever one you like. Spells. We look at the spell section of both books. Obviously, the Basic Fantasy book is a little bit bigger, so there's some more meat in here somewhere, and spells is one of the places you find it. Basic Fantasy contains, just the core book, contains 48 cleric spells and 68 magic user spells for a total of 116 spells available. Whereas White Box only has 27 cleric spells and 65 magic user spells for a grand total of 92 spells available. Both of the games have rules for henchmen, adventuring, magical treasure, and more. You know, it's what you would expect. There's not a lot of difference here. Most fantasy games cover all of that. So the last thing that we're going to compare on the two games is the monsters presented and ready for you to throw at your players. Basic Fantasy has 183 monsters in just the core book, whereas White Box only has 108. So you definitely have a little bigger variety there. And I've used that as well, pulling monsters from one to the other. Now there are a few smaller differences, like the strength of a cleric's turning ability, the way certain treasure charts are laid out, and so on, but these are mostly just a matter of taste. I will say that I find the White Box book to be a bit better organized than Basic Fantasy. For instance, in Basic Fantasy, there is a bit of flipping back and forth to find things like the cleric's turning table or the saving throw matrix or attack bonuses, whereas in White Box everything is all together in one section, and everything you need for your character's level progression is all on one chart or two charts, but it's in the character section for that character. There's not a bunch of flipping back and forth through the book to find things. You just turn to the character and the race and class you want to play, and everything you need is right there. So I do find that it is better organized than Basic Fantasy. My final thoughts are, I don't really think one is necessarily better than the other. I think it's a matter of taste and what you and your group will enjoy the most. My suggestion is to buy both. I mean, even if you bought both books, you're looking at $10. That's what I do. I own everything and will continue to buy everything they put out for Basic Fantasy. And here's a couple of reasons why. I have a few friends that I don't play with often, but when I do, they prefer to play Basic Fantasy. And they don't want to try a whole bunch of different games. And that's cool, because I do love Basic Fantasy and I like how it works. Sometimes White Box doesn't have stats for a monster that I want to use, and Basic Fantasy does. They're very easy to convert between the two. So I have been running a white box game and been like, oh man, well, I need stats for a rust monster, and they don't have it in the white box book, but it's in the basic fantasy book. So I just download and print that sheet out, and I've got a monster ready to go. Also, basic fantasy has a lot of adventures that can be used very easily with very little to any conversion at all. I know this for a fact because I have done it quite a bit. They're, especially with my kids' game, because they're not super into the story. They're kind of into the story, but they want to play the game. So, like I said, I have all of the basic fantasy books up here, and I can walk over there on any given Sunday afternoon, pull one off the shelf, and find an adventure very quickly that I can run using the white box rules that my kids like, with like I said, very little conversion whatsoever. So to me, they're kind of two games that work in tandem. They work hand in hand. I can use stuff from one to the other, and I like that. I like, yes, the white box has stuff. I've downloaded it. I have a big binder up here, a white box binder, that I've put all the white box books in that I've downloaded and printed out. And that's great, and it is stuff I use. But sometimes, if I want a plethora of adventures, I have tons of that with basic fantasy. So whether I have friends that are wanting to play basic fantasy, or whether I have friends that are wanting to play white box and there's monsters or adventures that I need that I don't have, I can usually find it right up there. So for the many of you that have asked me which one you should get and why, I really hope this video kind of helps point out the differences. If you have other questions about the two, you can leave them in the comments and I'll answer when I can. It's so cheap to get. You could literally buy everything for basic fantasy for the price of one D&D book from Wizards of the Coast. So I don't see any reason not to get it. Also, you can download all of their books, not just their main book. You can go to basicfantasy.org and download all of their books, including stuff that hasn't been put into print yet, for free, and use any of it. So if you like using stuff on a tablet or printing your own stuff out, you can do it that way as well. That's really kind of it. Like I know there's people who were hoping that I was going to bash on one or, you know, or the other. I don't really do that because I do like both games. I do play both games. I run and play more white box than I do basic fantasy, but that's just because of how my group is set up. My suggestion really is check them both out. You can do it for free. You can download this off of Drive-Thru-RPG for free. You can download the Basic Fantasy off of basicfantasy.org for free, and read through and just see which set you like the best, which set of rules appeals to you the most. And that's the way to go. I think I hit most of the big differences between the two. If I didn't, and there's a difference that somebody out there realizes I didn't bring up, hey, put it in the comments, because people do read this stuff, and there are people who are looking to get just one of these, and then they want to know every difference they can. And that's just kind of where we're at with it. I really like both, but if you just want to get one, I say look at this video as kind of a guide for the difference between the two and just what sounds easy and fun for your group. If you'd like to help out the channel, check out the link to my Amazon wish list. It's in the description. If you would like to see some of the stuff I'm working on, or games that I'm playing, or just communicate with me directly, check out the Rob's Game Group Facebook page. The link is also in the description. And no matter which set of rules that you use for fantasy adventures, good gaming and good luck.